Most people think a chronograph is just a stopwatch attached to a watch. But mechanically, a chronograph is one of the most sophisticated systems in all of watchmaking. Every time you press one of these pushers, an entire choreography of gears, levers, springs, clutches, and hammers suddenly comes to life underneath the dial. And not all chronographs work the same way. Some use the lateral clutch, some use a vertical clutch. Some use split-second systems that are among the most complex mechanisms ever put into a watch. So today, I want to visually break down how a chronograph works using 3 real watches. My Dan Royter DR-02 for a traditional lateral clutch chronograph, the Rolex Daytona for a modern vertical clutch system, and the Lange and Söhne Datograph split seconds to show one of the most advanced chronograph complications ever made.
Now, my name is James. I'm a watch enthusiast, I'm a watch collector, and I'm also an advisor. And my main goal for you is that you know and love your watches. So if you like this type of content, please do like the video and subscribe to the channel, and check out my additional content down in the description below.
At its core, a chronograph is a second timing system that's layered onto a normal watch movement. Your watch is already tracking the hours, the minutes, and seconds continuously throughout the day. But adding a chronograph gives you an entirely separate mechanism that can start, stop, and reset independently of that timing function. When you press the start pusher, the movement has to connect an additional gear train to the movement while everything is already running, and that's mechanically difficult to do. Because if the engagement isn't controlled properly, you can get stuttering hands, you can get friction, you can have loss of amplitude of the actual timekeeping, and increased wear. And this is why chronographs are considered one of the most technically demanding mainstream complications that are out there. Every chronograph movement has a few major systems working together. First, the mainspring barrel supplies energy to the movement itself. That energy flows through the normal gear train. But now we introduce the chronograph system. So this is the chronograph wheel, the component that actually drives the chronograph seconds hand. But it can't stay engaged permanently. There has to be a mechanism connecting and disconnecting it from the movement on command. That is the clutch system. Now we're going to compare lateral and vertical clutch systems in just a moment. Once the chronograph stops, the movement also needs a way to snap the hands perfectly back to zero. And that is where the heart cam comes in. The reset hammer falls onto the heart-shaped cam, and because of its geometry, the hand always returns perfectly to zero. That is incredibly elegant mechanical engineering. And then there's another component that enthusiasts consistently talk about, which is the column wheel, which acts as the command center coordinating start, stop, and reset functions throughout the movement. Now let's start with traditional chronograph architecture, the lateral clutch. And my Dan Royter DR-02 is a great example of this. In a lateral clutch system, a gear physically slides sideways into another gear when you start the chronograph. Think of it like gears meshing together in a transmission. When you press the pusher, the clutch arm moves laterally, the gears engage, and the chronograph seconds hand starts moving. Now, this architecture is mechanically beautiful, and one of the reasons enthusiasts love lateral clutch chronographs is because you can often actually see the engagement happen, just like this. It feels alive, it feels theatrical, but at the same time, there are trade-offs. Because the gears mesh together while moving, you can sometimes see a slight jump or a stutter when the chronograph actually starts. And honestly, many collectors enjoy this because it reminds you that real mechanical interaction is happening underneath the dial. Historically, lateral clutch chronographs dominated watchmaking for decades. They're traditional, they're visually engaging, and they're full of mechanical charm. But they also introduce more friction and slightly more wear over time, which brings us to the more modern solution to this problem. The Rolex Daytona uses a vertical clutch chronograph, and mechanically it solves many of the issues associated with these lateral clutch systems. Instead of gears sliding sideways into each other, a vertical clutch uses stacked discs pressing together vertically, almost like a car clutch in a way. And when the chronograph starts, the discs clamp together and transfer power smoothly. And the result is immediately visible. The chronograph seconds hand starts almost perfectly smoothly. No visible jump, no stutter, just immediate engagement. Vertical clutch systems also reduce wear significantly, which means that the chronograph can run continuously with very little impact on the movement. And that's part of why many Daytona owners simply leave the chronograph running full time. Now, visually, vertical clutch systems are less dramatic mechanically than lateral clutch systems. But from a pure engineering and usability standpoint, they are incredibly refined. And Rolex pairs this system with a column wheel, which gives the Daytona that crisp, precise pusher feel that collectors love. Now, there's another chronograph problem worth discussing here, and that is amplitude loss. So in other words, when you activate a chronograph, you're adding an additional load onto the movement. That can slightly reduce balance amplitude and ultimately affect the timekeeping precision of the watch. Now, most high-end chronographs manage this pretty well, but Jaeger-LeCoultre approached this problem in a different way with the Duometre chronograph. The Duometre uses what Jaeger-LeCoultre calls a dual wing or dual barrel architecture. Essentially, the watch has two separate mainspring barrels and two separate gear trains in the watch. One powers normal timekeeping, and the other powers just the chronograph itself. So when you activate the chronograph, it's not stealing energy from the main timekeeping system. Instead, that separation helps maintain stable amplitude and chronometric performance while the chronograph is running. Mechanically, it's an incredibly clever solution to a problem that most people have never even realized exists. And it just shows how deep chronograph engineering can really go. Now let's isolate the column wheel for a moment because enthusiasts talk about this all the time. So the column wheel is essentially a rotating control component with vertical pillars cut into it. And as it rotates, those columns guide and coordinate the movement of various levers throughout the chronograph system. Think of it like a mechanical command center, if you will. Every time you press a pusher, the column wheel rotates incrementally and changes the position of the system itself. So you have start, stop, and reset. Now, not every chronograph uses a column wheel. Some use cam actuated systems instead, which are generally cheaper and easier to mass produce. But a well-made column wheel chronograph has this incredibly crisp and refined tactile feel. And once you experience it, you immediately start to understand why collectors care about it as much as they do. Now, let's get into the truly elite of chronograph engineering, and that is the split seconds chronograph, also sometimes known as a retropont. And the Lange and Sohne Datograph split seconds is one of the greatest examples of this ever made. A split chronograph allows you to time two events simultaneously. At first, both chronograph seconds hands move together as one. But when you press the split pusher, which sometimes is the same button, sometimes it's a different button, one hand actually stops while the other continues running. And then when you press it again, the stopped hand instantly catches back up. Mechanically, this is unbelievably complicated, so you just got to know that. But now you're introducing additional clamps, wheel trains, isolators, and incredibly delicate tolerances, all while preserving really precise chronograph timing. And visually, this is one of the most mesmerizing complications in watchmaking altogether. Watching those hands separate and reconnect never really gets old. So chronographs are one of the best examples of why mechanical watches remain fascinating. Because every time you press one of these pushers, you're activating an incredibly sophisticated mechanism underneath the dial. And different chronograph architectures create completely different experiences. The Dan Royter DR-02 gives you that traditional lateral clutch mechanical theater. The Daytona from Rolex delivers modern smoothness and refinement with its vertical clutch system. And then the Lange und Söhne Datograph split seconds represents some of the highest levels of chronograph engineering that exists today, as also personified in the JLC Duomètre that we talked about. Once you understand what's actually happening underneath the dial in a chronograph, you stop seeing chronographs as just sporty watches, and you start to see them as the mechanical choreography that they really are. Now, if you enjoyed this video, take a look at last week's video where I talk about power reserve indicators and how they actually work. So thanks so much for stopping by, and I will see you all next time. Bye-bye.